Good morning and welcome to this presentation. I'm going to be talking about a couple of my books. When Rochambeau left France, they could only get enough ships to bring half the army, so they had to leave half the army behind, and he came over with about almost 6,000 soldiers and probably a navy crew of pretty much the same number. He came along with one quartermaster and 6 assistant quartermasters. Now, usually quartermasters' diaries aren't very important because what quartermasters do is basically do all the preparation and providing the materials that the soldiers are going to need, and making sure that all the housing and materials are available. However, in this case, the quartermaster diaries are very important. Up until 1960, only one of the, actually in 1960, one of the quartermaster diaries was published. That was the diary of Alexandre Berthier. And the importance of his diary is he has a lot of maps in there. But the maps that he's talking about were, or that he's doing, were done in October of 1780, when the troops really didn't have much to do, and they were looking for stuff to occupy themselves. And I'll probably get into that a little bit later. Anyway, only three of the quartermasters kept diaries. I translated 2 of them. One of them being the diary of Mathieu Dumas. I think Dumas is the guy who planned the route to Yorktown. And what's important about this diary is that most of the diaries that are written were rewritten 25 to 50 years later, when the authors were preparing them for either publication or for their grandchildren, what I did in the war, grandson. The other diary is The Road to Yorktown, which is the diary of the Comte de l'Auberdière. Comte de l'Auberdière was Rochambeau's nephew and aide-de-camp. So he had a pretty unique perspective on the war. And we're going to get into some of those things. One of the things about this diary is that it's given me material for 5 published articles before I even translated the diary. After those articles, I figured it was time to do a translation. Well, one of the things I'm going to talk about is the stuff that is not included in the diary. I know most people come to an author talk and expect the author to present everything that's in the book. Well, I'm going to talk about stuff that's not in the book. And what I mean about that is that first of all, there was a major map that was not published in the book, and there were a lot of newspaper articles, and his diary was sort of like a scrapbook. He collected poems and dedications and all kinds of stuff that he kept in the diary. Even though I translated those, the publisher didn't publish them. In any case, the major map that was in the diary is this map. This is a very large map, and this is a map of Newport. All of the diaries of the officers and soldiers who recorded the arrival of the French in Newport talk about the mechanics of the landing. This regiment landed on this day, this is what they did, and so on and so forth. Nobody talks about where they landed. And the common assumption is that they landed up here in the harbor, right near what is now Kings Park. And if you look at Berthier's diary, he's got a landing site marked there. He's also got a landing site marked off by the ocean where the beaches are. And also down here at Saconnet Point. But if you read his diary, he says that the landing sites that he's marked on the map are where he expects the British to attack. If the British are going to come back to Newport, this is where he expected them to land and attack the city. So this is a detail of that map. And down here at Saconnet Point, this is the the only map that indicates one landing site. He's got a landing site here and a landing site over here. This is what Rhode Islanders call Third Beach. So he talks about the landing being at Wood's Castle. Well, Wood's Castle is right here, and Wood's home was over here. And this was a all field area, so this was a great place for the soldiers to disembark the ship and engage and sort of line up and engage. But he doesn't talk about the mechanics of the landing. So he talks about the landing over there, and he doesn't mention it at the time of the landing, but on October 7th. Remember when I was talking about how the soldiers had nothing to do during the month of October? Well, here it is, the beginning of October. He's talking about playing war games, and he's having they're having the war games down here at Wood's Castle. And he says that this is the place where the landing site was. So this is where Sakonnet Point is. He also says that when they traveled from here to the camp, it was 1 mile distance. Well, it's exactly 1 mile from this beach to the campsite up here. And so that's how we know that this is where the campsite was. Rhode Islanders will still think that the landing site was in Newport, actually in Newport. This area is now called Middletown, but they'll still want to talk about the landing site as being in Newport at Kings Park, but that is not the case. So one of my articles was about the landing site and Rochambeau's reception there. Another thing that he talks about is St. Louis Day. St. Louis Day is the king's name day, and it's more important than your birthday for the king. And if you remember things like the celebrations of the Queen Elizabeth's birthday, all the pageantry and everything that goes on there, well, the king is nowhere near Rhode Island at this time. He's 3,000 miles away, but they're having a grand celebration in Rhode Island. Well, what Loberdier says in his diary is that on St. Louis Day, Rochambeau reviewed the troops. They had a parade. He reviewed the troops, and they fired a feu de joie. And he leaves it at that. Well, a feu de joie is you've got 6,000 soldiers all lined up in parade. They all load their muskets, and the companies are generally about 75 to 100 men, and they're arranged by companies. So you've got 60 companies of men lined up all along the front. And the soldiers fire by companies, starting from the left to the right. Then they reload, fire from the right to the left. And then they reload again, and they fire the whole army, one massive battalion fire. And that is one huge explosion. While they're doing that, the cannons from the forts, these are the number and the caliber of the cannon barrels. So you've got 61 guns and 17 mortars. They're firing 183 shots from the artillery. The soldiers are firing. You've got 5,000 soldiers firing, 6,000 soldiers firing 3 shots apiece. That's 15,000 shots. You've got 48 vessels in the harbor, and each vessel. There's the composition of the fleet, and so they have 699 guns firing. They fire over 1,008 shots. That is 1.5 to 2 tons of gunpowder. 4th of July is coming up. I don't think you're going to find any parade that is going to be any larger, or any fireworks display that's going to be any larger than this particular event. This is a graphic of a very small feu de joie that was held at Fort Adams. Here you've got the Artillery Company of Newport and the Rhode Island Regiment and others lined up doing a firing. This gives you an idea of what the feu de joie is like. Another thing that he talks about is about a week or so later after actually it's less than a week. The king's King's name day was on August 25th. On August 29th to September 2nd, there's a delegation of Native Americans who comes down to Rhode Island to meet Rochambeau. Remember that the French and the Indians were allies during the French and Indian War, and that in that particular war, they were enemies of the Americans. The French were Americans' enemies in all the colonial wars up until this point. So they're coming down to Rhode Island to meet Rochambeau, to praise him, to proclaim allegiance to the king, and they also wanted to request a priest. Rochambeau gave them a priest who went to the tribes. He was supposed to be there only for a couple of weeks. He never came back. So he took up residence with the Indians, most likely. And then there was an empty house in Newport that he assigned for the Native Americans to stay while they were here in Newport. Well, he posted a guard at all the doors to make sure that they didn't go out. They had a reputation of getting unruly when they started drinking too much. So he wanted to avoid that, so he posted a guard to keep them in the house and to avoid their drinking. The next day, they have sort of a demonstration. It's sort of like a parade kind of thing, and a demonstration of battle tactics. Well, what the Native Americans were most impressed with was Lauzun's Legion, who was attacking at the Gallop, and they were very much impressed with that. Another thing that amazed them was that the French camp was in an apple orchard, and this was harvest season, so all the apples were ripe, and any other army camped in that area would have devoured all the apples on those trees, but none of the apples were touched because Rochambeau kept a very strong discipline in the army to make sure that they did not take any food that was not authorized. In fact, 2 days after the landing, one soldier was caught stealing a morsel of cheese off a windowsill that the woman had put on a plate on the windowsill to cool or whatever, and he took a piece of cheese. He ended up getting sentenced to 30 lashes for that infringement. He goes on to talk about the descriptions and the customs of the Native Americans, about all the dances that they did and how they performed their dances and sang songs and stuff. And on October 20th, there was another delegation of Abenaki and Micmac Indians who came down to Newport to request charity from the French army. The French gave the Indians some trinkets, some blankets, some beads, and so on. And I mentioned earlier about October being sort of like a down month where soldiers were getting bored and having nothing to do. Well, at this time, Rochambeau decides to have them play war games, and he divides the army into two. One is playing the attackers, the other is defenders, and they're reenacting an amphibious attack on Newport. And there happened to be an accident at that time where one of the batteries, they were ramming the cannonball into the cannon barrel, and they forgot to take the rammer out when when the gun went off. So the rammer goes flying down the field, and it's going head over heels all the way down the field, and ends up hitting this woman in the leg and broke her leg. So Rochambeau assigned his personal doctor to take care of the woman, to treat her until she recovered. At the end of the month, at the beginning of November, the soldiers take up winter quarters. Now, during the British occupation, they had the first winter that they were in Newport. Ezra Stiles' diary mentions that the British Army were not prepared for the cold winter, so they tore down some 300 houses and used them for firewood. when they finished burning those houses, they tore up the wharves, and that destroyed the shipping industry in Newport. Well, when the French arrived in 1780, there happened to be a few houses that were still standing, and many of them had been damaged, so the soldiers repaired the houses at their own expense with the understanding that they would be able to use those houses as barracks rather than have to rebuild the barracks. Now, in September of 1780, on September 20th to 22nd, there was a conference between Washington and Rochambeau down in Hartford. And the following May, on May 20th, there was another conference in Wethersfield, Connecticut. And people speculate that this was the time when Rochambeau and Washington were planning the siege of Yorktown. And that is not the case, because Cornwallis was nowhere near Yorktown at that time. He was still in Petersburg, Virginia. And he didn't arrive into Yorktown until August 1st of 1781. So they could not have been planning this event at that time because they didn't know where he was going. Well, one of the things that Washington really needed in his army was engineers. And he had a number of engineers who could make maps, they could build things, but they could build fortifications, but they were such that the enemy could ignore them and just go around them or attack elsewhere. So those type of fortifications weren't very useful. He relied primarily on the French engineers, and there were a number of French engineers who came over the years into Newport, or not into Newport, but into America, and they presented themselves to Congress, they presented themselves to Washington, and many of them they'd inflated their resumes, and they were not really as good as they pretended to be. Well, one of them who was sent over here, or actually came over here, was Louis du Portail. And he impressed Washington so much that he became Washington's head general. And he founded what eventually became the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the French were the masters of fortification at this time. Right from the middle to the end of the 17th century, Sébastien de Lepret de Vauban was the master of, or he was the one who wrote the textbooks on French fortifications and the design of star-shaped forts and so on. So he was the primary person who was influential. And that type of warfare was common right up until the American Civil War. So this presented a problem for Washington because these guys were coming over. Most of his soldiers remembered the French as being the enemies in all the colonial wars, and they weren't very welcoming when the French arrived here. They did not want to serve under French officers. So you had Generals Sullivan, Knox, and Greene, who wrote a letter to Washington, to Congress, saying that they did not want to serve under French officers, and General Sullivan threatened to resign over this fact, and Congress responded. Apparently, he played this card on a number of occasions in threatening to resign, because on this occasion, when Congress received the letter signed by him, they wrote back to General Sullivan with a copy to Washington, saying that whenever General Sullivan deems it fit to retire, to announce his retirement, we will gladly accept it. And that was the last time he played that card. And Washington was advised that Congress was not taking it lightly, that they were not taking orders from their generals. The generals were under the command of Washington. This is a slide of Fort Griswold in Ledyard in Connecticut, in Groton, Connecticut. And this shows the outline of like the star-shaped fort, and it shows how you could, if you had gunners up here in the points, you could cover all of the walls, so you could protect the entire fort just by staffing in those areas. Well, when Duportail arrived in America, he couldn't come just as as an officer, because that would require a commission, which would become public knowledge, and this was before the French declared war. So this would have been an act of war where this general is coming, or he wasn't a general at the time, but he was an officer. He was coming over to America. He was going to help the Americans, and so they couldn't commission him, but they couldn't discharge him from the army. So what they did is the king issued an order giving him leave. He had a 2-year leave of absence to take care of personal business. Well, it was understood that his personal business was to go to America and help the army fight the British. He also was allowed to select 3 other soldiers who would come with him, three other engineers who would come with him. Now, the engineers not only had the duties to make maps and to design fortifications and stuff like that, they also were in charge of all the mathematics of cannonry and artillery, and they did a lot of their principal use in America was siege warfare. And so when Duportail arrived here, the army was preparing to go into winter quarters, and Washington held a council of war where all of his generals were present, and he tells them, we've got 3 or 4 sites that we're considering for winter quarters. Which one would be most suitable? Well, Duportail was the only one. Washington had a habit of requesting all of his generals to give written reports. Well, all of the generals would give written reports answering his questions, saying they think that this is the best place to go for winter quarters, but they didn't really go into all the details. Well, Duportail gives a whole analysis of the geography, the weather conditions, the strength of the enemy, the distance, and so on, and he recommends that they go to Valley Forge. And so that's what they did, is they ended up spending the winter at Valley Forge. This is the orders that Duportail and his fellow generals had, giving them the order to take a leave of absence, to take leave of absence to take care of personal business. This was also to keep it secret, that all the negotiations, and because Franklin and Duportail wanted to keep a low profile and keep all of this secret, Duportail did not want to meet at Franklin's hotel where he was staying. They wanted to meet at a separate place where it could be secret and people wouldn't see them coming or going. And he also knew that, well, it turned out that Duportail couldn't speak English and Franklin couldn't speak French. So in order to communicate, Duportail offered to have the communications done in Latin. Well, Franklin didn't know Latin either. So he had to rely on a translator who happened to be on vacation, or he happened to be absent at the time that Ben Franklin had sent one of his important letters, and he totally misunderstood Franklin's letter, thinking that Franklin did not want his services, and he totally misunderstood, and he was ready to scrap the whole project. But anyway, when his translator came back, he found out that he had totally misunderstood, and they set things right. Well, Duportail and his 3 companions come to General Washington's headquarters at Coryell's Ferry in New Jersey on July 29, 1777. Coryell's Ferry was where Washington's famous crossing of the Delaware occurred, and that was one of the ferries that on one side that was used. So he decided that, or recommended that Valley Forge be taken as the winter quarters. So they started building some 2,000 huts. They had about 20,000 men and officers who needed to be quartered, and each of the huts numbered 9 to 12 men. And the construction was completed a month after the encampment, and sort of overnight, Valley Forge became the 4th largest city in America. And this is an example of some of the huts that were built for the event. This is actually at Valley Forge at one of the campsites. They had several of these campsites all over the hills in Valley Forge. So you'd have 9 to 12 men sleeping in a hut like this, on bunks and stuff. This is Duportail's map of Valley Forge, and this was how he wanted to defend Valley Forge. So this is a modern National Park Service map of Valley Forge with some illustrations, and you see on the map you've got the four redoubts pointed out, and if you look carefully, Washington's headquarters is over here. The camp is sort of done as a triangle with the point facing Philadelphia. Philadelphia is down here to the lower left, and the artillery park is here. It's designed in such a way that the artillery could have been moved to any point along where the campsite was. And one of the reasons that Valley Forge was important for a campsite is that it's about 13 to 15 miles from Philadelphia. And an average day's march for a soldier was about 18 miles, which meant that if the soldiers were marching out from Philadelphia, they would already have completed pretty much of a day's march to get there. They'd arrive there exhausted, and then they would have to go into combat. And they'd have to fight the 20,000 men who were here. The point is facing Philadelphia, so in order to get to the back of the triangle, they would have had to go either through or around the artillery, and that artillery could have been deployed all over the place. Duportail is the one who designed this fortification. Valley Forge was never attacked because of that. The whole winter that they were in Valley Forge, there was no military action, but all the time that they were there, the French under General Steuben even though he was a German, he was in the French army. So he was teaching the soldiers how to maneuver and drill and so on, so that by the end of the Valley Forge encampment, the American troops met the British troops at Monmouth, and they fought. Monmouth was probably the largest of the battlegrounds of the entire war, and they met the British at Monmouth, and they fought on equal terms. They were so evenly matched in fighting that the land changed hands 7 times, moving back and forth as one unit captured more territory. It would move over, and then they moved back and forth. One of the generals that Duportail brought with him, one of the engineers that Duportail brought with him was de la Radière, who was appointed to design the fortifications at West Point. And West Point is another fortification that was never attacked. So the French designed the attacks or the fortifications at West Point. Kosciuszko was also in the French army, but he did not get along with the other Frenchmen. So he was also one of the engineers who worked at West Point. But One of the things about Kosciuszko is that during the Valley Forge encampment, there was a group of generals who wanted to depose Washington as commander-in-chief, the Conway Cabal, because it was led by General Conway, General Gates, and Kosciuszko was one of Gates's favorites. So whenever the French officers were near West Point, Kosciuszko made a point of not being there, particularly when Duportail was coming to West Point. He made a point of being away, and because of his association with Gates and the Conway Cabal, when Gates was transferred to the Southern Army, Kosciuszko requested to go with him, and Washington gladly agreed and let him go south with Gates. And throughout the entire war, Washington never gave any audience to Kosciuszko, so he never had any meetings with Kosciuszko on that. In the campaign of 1781, the French and the Americans left Newport and traveled up to Providence, and they went west down to New York. They camped for about a month in New York, besieging New York. And while they were there, around the middle of August, around August 15th, Rochambeau gets a letter from Admiral de Grasse saying that he was coming up to America with his fleet, but he could only stay until the month of September, because he did not want to get caught in a hurricane, as did Admiral d'Estaing in 1778. So he would come up, and at the beginning of hurricane season, he wanted to be back down in the West Indies. So he brought up a large fleet and a sizable army under General Saint-Simon. They came up, and he said they were only going as far as the Chesapeake. So when they got to the Chesapeake, they ended up capturing the Chesapeake, and they blockaded the Chesapeake. So when the British Navy came down from New York, they thought they could go up the Chesapeake and relieve Cornwallis, but they could not get into the Chesapeake because the French had already captured the bay, and they blockaded it. So at that point, they knew that this is when Rochambeau and Washington decided to go south, and they headed south to Virginia, and they ended up going to Yorktown. In the meantime, Lafayette was already down there fighting the British with General Greene, so they were chasing the British all through the Carolinas until the British ended up going to Yorktown, and they sort of fortified that, and they ended up bottlenecking in Yorktown. This is an example of one of the fortifications at Yorktown. I think this is the Grand French Battery. So you'll notice that Duportail designed all of the fortifications at Yorktown. So this was another reason for his importance. You'll see that not only did the approaches have a trench, but once you cross the trench, what you don't see in this slide is this trench was very deep. So the soldier would have to climb over the hill, go down into the trench, and then when they came up out of the trench, they had all of these are what are called frays. They're all stakes that are sticking out. They had to cut through those, and the British had two redoubts like this in this type of structure, redoubts number 9 and redoubts number 10, and the French captured redoubt number 9. The Americans under Alexander Hamilton and the Rhode Island Regiment under Stephen Olney captured redoubt number 10, and that got them so close to the British lines that the British ended up having to retreat, or they had to surrender. And the importance of the French at this event, this siege, was that this was one of the grand sieges of the war, and it was all designed by the French. 2/3 to 3/4 of the French of the Allied troops at Yorktown were French. So there were more French at Yorktown than Americans and Anglos. So when Cornwallis surrendered, it appeared that he wanted to surrender to the French. Actually, Cornwallis didn't actually surrender. It was he had his second in command surrender, and his second in command was General O'Hara, and he presented his sword to Rochambeau. Rochambeau gestured to him to surrender to Washington, which he ended up doing. The terms of the surrender were: General O'Hara was commander of Charleston, South Carolina, the year before, when the Americans had to surrender at Charlestown on May 12, 1780. O'Hara dictated the terms of surrender, requiring that they would have no flags flying, no music playing, that the troops were to surrender their arms. This was the largest American surrender up until the surrender at Bataan in World War II, and so the terms of the surrender the following year was that the same as O'Hara had imposed on the Americans at Charlestown. So the British weren't allowed to fly their flags, but they were allowed to play music, as long as it was not a parody of an American tune, which they would have liked to play things like Yankee Doodle and stuff like that, and sort of make fun of the Americans. But the terms of the surrender were such that they were the same as what O'Hara had imposed at Charlestown, and so when Benjamin Lincoln had to surrender to O'Hara at Yorktown, at Charlestown, when O'Hara surrendered his sword to Washington, Washington gestured him to surrender to Benjamin Lincoln. So this was a sort of a turn of events that it was just the opposite of what happened at Charlestown, and that's the part of the story about these books that I've done. I also have a book on America's First Ally, which chronicles all the aid that the French gave to America, both military and financial and covert aid. I also have a book on actually I have a 6-volume set on the battles of the war, called the Guide to the American Revolution, battles, skirmishes, and they're arranged by state and region. So, for example, one book covers Canada and New England, the other book covers New York, another one New Jersey, and so on. So I covered 6 volumes on the war on land, covering about 4,500 actions. And I also have, after I completed that, I did a 7-volume set on the war at sea and overseas, covering about 10,500 actions. So that's much larger than what most books or histories cover. Many more than the 100 or so battles that we think that we learn about in school that were fought. The war was much more encompassing. It covered from Canada to Florida, from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, and there was even an action that occurred on the West Coast. And then after it sort of ended here in the Americas, the war became an international war. Some of it was fought in South America, some in Africa, and a good part of it in India. So this was sort of like the First World War, and the French helped us out an awful lot in this area. And that is my presentation. Thank you.